So over the years, I've noticed that I most definitely fall into a pattern of repetition when it comes to my landscape photo editing workflow. Now, on its face, that isn't a bad thing. If you can get the look that you're going for using the same workflow that you've always used, then by all means, keep at it. The thing is that Lightroom actually has so many powerful tools, especially related to improving and refining color, that they can sometimes get overlooked because they may not be part of your usual editing workflow. So in this video, I'd like to share 3 underrated color tools in Lightroom that can have a big impact on your landscape photos. Not only will I show you the basics of how these tools work, I'll also show you some of the more common misunderstandings with these tools so that you can get the most out of them and use them effectively. All right, let's dive in. All right, so here, this is the photo we're going to work on. I'm going to be able to use all 3 of those underrated tools that I mentioned for this photo. This is a very, very popular photo taken in the Lofoten Islands region of northern Norway. And so the first thing that I usually do when I approach a landscape edit is I do the basics where I really like to get cropping done so I can see the actual composition. I like to get things like a custom white balance so I can get a proper color and tint to the photo so I know what I'm working on. Basically, I like to get to a good baseline because when you're at a good baseline, everything that you add on top of it, it'll just be more accurate and they'll give you a better idea of what the final result will look like. So with that, as you can see here, this is Lightroom Desktop, but everything I show you, you can do in Lightroom Classic as well. So no worries there. So let's start by going to the very bottom here and let's enable lens correction. This is a wide angle lens. So you can see here is a Sony 16 to 35 millimeter lens, and you can see the barrel distortion and a little bit of the vignetting that was corrected, which is good. We want to do this. Next, what I'm going to do is go to crop over here. And I like to have my aspect ratio locked. I generally like to keep it what it is, unless I know that I'm going to change it to, say, a square or a 16:9 or a 5:4 or 4:5 rather for Instagram. I just keep it at the original. So I'm going to crop in here from the bottom left as well. And I'm basically looking for the overall composition I'm going to work with. So let's see here. This looks great. I might go back here and bring it down just a little bit. Cool. This looks great. All right. You can clearly tell, though, that there is a bit of a color cast from the filter that I was using and the time of day. So to alleviate that, I'm going to go to color over here. I'm going to select the dropper, and I'm going to balance off of something that's kind of neutral gray, like this area here in the white caps. And when I do, you can see that that kind of color cast is gone. It looks much more natural. The other thing that I do before I start editing color is, ever since we released the Adobe Adaptive Profiles for color and black and white, I love these. I think these work really well. They only work with supported RAW and DNG files. So if you're using a JPEG, you won't see that option, but 99.9% of the files that I shoot with my camera are saved as RAW. So when I hover over here, you can see what it does. Like I'll just hover out and then hover back. And it does this beautiful job of just correcting the tone of the image and making the color just a little bit more, it looks more natural and a little bit more contrasty, which I like. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now, of course, here we have an amount slider. So you can dial it up or dial it down. So in this case here, I'm going to dial it back just a little bit. And that looks good. And so if I hit the backslash key, this is the image that we started with the crop applied. It's not showing you the original uncropped image, but all of the edits have been removed. And so even in just a few clicks, we've gotten a great shot, and we haven't even done anything yet with the 3 tools that I was referencing to improve color. Now, here's the thing. Before I start doing these kind of stylization edits, I definitely like to dial in tone. So while this isn't an actual color tip, this is an overall landscape editing tip. For me, this goes back to getting myself to a good starting place, a good baseline for my image, and part of that has to do with tone. Now, Adaptive Color did a great job of fixing a lot of that. I mean, the histogram looks great here, but I still will open up exposure just a bit, and I'm also going to open up shadows just a bit. And so to me, this is looking better. And the last thing I'm going to do further with contrast is I'm going to apply an S-curve here. If you don't know how the point curve works, I'm going to drop a card right above that will explain how this works. This is something every photographer should really learn. Not that you have to master it, but you should understand how the point curve works, because it is really powerful in allowing you to create your own kind of custom contrast instead of just using this contrast slider. And so you can see here that I'm adding my own contrast here and applying a little bit of gray to the darkest parts of the image. And so if I toggle this curves subpanel, you can see the effect it has. Now, this is a color tip, but it isn't part of the 3 tools. There is this refined saturation slider below the curve here. And the reason why this is so great and why I'm so happy that we have it is because when you do apply edits to the curve, it does add a little bit of a color boost that you might not want. So if you bring this to the left here all the way, it basically removes that color boost. I generally find around halfway is a nice balance. All right, now let's start with the first of the 3 underrated tools. The first one is underrated because it's hidden by default in Lightroom Desktop. If you're using Lightroom Classic, it's always been there. It's usually by default at the very bottom of the Develop panel, called Calibration. In Lightroom Desktop, it's called Color Calibration. And so if we scroll down here, you'll see there is the panel. Now, the reason why I said again it's very underrated is because it is hidden by default. To access it, you'll click on this tri-dot icon here at the bottom of the right toolbar, and you'll see this option here. Incidentally, if you're new to Lightroom, another thing that's hidden by default is the histogram. This should be the very first thing. If you're new to Lightroom and you happen to watch this video and you made it this far, turn this on. Not having your histogram, that's just not good. You need to have your histogram visible. So showing it is good. And then turn this on here and it will appear right here, right under color grading. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to share another video which dives deep into how the color calibration panel works and why you should use it. But in this case, what I'm going to show you here is pretty straightforward. A lot of people, they're either intimidated because they don't know how it works, or it's hidden and they don't know that it's here, or they don't make it to the very bottom of the Lightroom Classic Develop panel. But there's this specific slider here called Blue Primary Saturation. What these sliders do is they will change the value, the color value of every pixel in the image. And I find that by increasing the Blue Primary Saturation slider, if there was one slider that I would use here in my entire edit stack, it would be this one, because it does this beautiful job of just punching up all of the colors in a landscape photo to the right degree. Now, because this image also has greens and reds, I do tend to increase these as well, but not as much as blue. And so what I'm doing here is I'm hitting this little eye icon here to mute the edit to see the changes. It might not be as apparent to you, but I promise you it adds this beautiful, beautiful effect to the photo. It just punches up the colors in the right way. I might actually bring the saturation slider for blue even higher. Then I'm also going to adjust the hue of the green primary to the left here and the red primary to the right. And so again, if we toggle this, I mean, it just punches everything up really nicely. And again, what it's doing is it's changing the color value of each of the RGB pixels in your image. And so unlike other color tools, which might act on a more localized way, this is editing every pixel that you see there. All right, so that is the first underrated tool, color calibration. Again, I have a video at the end that I'll link to. It's super important. Take a few minutes and watch it. Now, the second color tool that I also have a detailed video on is point color. So point color was introduced into Lightroom at the Adobe Max, I believe, 2023 update. So almost 2 years. It is so powerful. And in addition to the color calibration video at the end of this video, I'll also include a video to my point color deep dive. Now, the thing is, point color in and of itself is great. I can use a dropper to select a color, and then I can refine that selection using these range tools here, which I'll show you in a second. And then once I have my selection dialed in, I can adjust that selection with the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders here. But if I use this here, we are in the global editing stack. it'll edit any red in the entire image. And I really just want to adjust the red of the cabins here. So what's cool is if I go to the masking panel, this is what's so underrated, is that you can combine the power of point color with the power of selections using these masking tools. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna select objects here. I'm gonna make sure that the marquee tool is selected, and I'm going to just make this selection here. And so if I hover over, you can see it made this great selection and identified the cabins, but I only want to edit the reds. Now, there are different ways to do that, but I find that using point color is one of the most powerful, and it's awesome because point color is one of the masking tools that you have available. So check this out. I'm going to select the dropper here, and then I'm going to select an area of the cabin that I want right there. And watch, if I click on visualize range, you see how everything that's not in the selection goes grayscale, and only the stuff that's in the selection, in this case here, the red, is showing the color. Now I can refine just in a broad stroke the range that's included here with this range slider. If I bring it to the left, look at this color swatch here. Watch how it becomes narrower as I bring it to the left. So fewer of the red hue is going to be in the selection, and then as I bring it out, more of that is included. So if you want it to be really refined, you can do that. And of course, you can use these range tools. Again, I've got a video that I'll link to at the end that dives into this. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but as it is here, the selection that I've got based on the visualize range checkbox is good. I can see here, it's editing the colors that I want. But all we did so far was make the selection. We told Lightroom which colors we want to edit. Now we can actually edit them using these three sliders. So the first thing I'm gonna do is bring this hue shift to the left here, which will adjust the red. The other thing I'm gonna do is really, really deepen that red, because I feel like these cabins, that's one of the things that like draws the eye. But I'm also gonna make it a little bit brighter because it got too dark. You see, it's getting a bit too dark, so I'm gonna make it a little bit brighter. And again, we've got this eye icon here that will mute the effect. So you can see just how much punchier those cabins look now. Now, of course, you can combine any of the masks with point color. So if there's a different area that you want to select and then isolate specific colors there with point color, you can do that. I just found it was really helpful to use the objects masking tool to select all of the structures and then use point color to refine it. And I find that a lot of times this is something that's underutilized and underrated because we sometimes forget that point color is one of the masking tools. So when you combine them, I mean, it just opens up so many possibilities here. All right, so for the third and final underrated tool for color editing landscape photos, people do use this tool, but when I speak to a lot of Lightroom users, there's confusion about it because they get intimidated. And let me show you what I mean. Specifically, I'm referring to color grading. Now, back in the day, we didn't have color grading, or it wasn't called color grading in Lightroom. It was called split toning. And you just had two different circles, so to speak. You had shadows and highlights. But several years ago, the Lightroom team updated this panel and converted to color grading and introduced the ability to adjust midtones. But at its highest level, with color grading, what you're doing is you're introducing a certain hue or color at a certain saturation or strength in a certain region of the image. So you might want to introduce, say, kind of a warm orange hue at kind of a low strength, only in the highlights or the brightest parts of your image. Maybe you want to use color theory and apply the inverse of that, which would be kind of a cooler blue in the shadows. And so I'm going to show you kind of an easier way that takes some of that intimidation from using color grading. The reason why I say that is because a lot of times users see this 3-up view, which is this icon over here. They see these 3 different color wheels, and it's just intimidating. This is something that's definitely more common for video editing. You know, you see these kind of dots here, the slider here, and you're not exactly sure what's going on. So my biggest tip is ignore the 3-up view initially until you become familiar. These 3 icons right here represent the 3 different tonal regions. So from the right, these are your highlights, these are your midtones, these are your shadows, and they correspond to these 3 color wheels. And the nice thing is when you click on one of these, you only see one region. But even better, instead of just seeing the color wheel with these 2 dots, it exposes the sliders that these dots represent. So let's start with hue. Hue is the color that you want to introduce into the region that you're in. So we're in highlights. Now watch, that's represented by this dot on the outside of the color wheel. As I adjust this hue slider, see how all it's doing is just going around. It starts and stops at the same place. Now, notice how when I change the hue, nothing happens to the image. That's because the saturation or strength is at 0. So there's nothing to introduce. So for beginners, for people who are new to color grading, I recommend using this view because the first thing that allows you to do is more easily kind of select which hue you want to apply. So again, I mentioned how I might want to warm the highlights. And so I'm going to apply this kind of color in between yellow and red, kind of this orangey color. Now I can start dialing up saturation. Now, I am not looking at the saturation slider. Do not look at the slider when you're adjusting it. Look at the image. So I click and then I look at the image and I start to see what that effect looks like. Now, look back at the color wheel and you'll see as I adjust saturation, you see that dot, it's going from the center to the outer edge. That's your strength. And so I'm going to stop kind of right around here. Like I want it to be pronounced, something right around here. And then there is one more slider, which corresponds to an unlabeled slider down here. That's the same one. It's your luminance slider. And so the luminance slider will brighten or darken the areas of the highlights. And the reason why you would want to do that is because if you want to accentuate the color grade in that region, or you want to kind of dial it back, you would do that with this luminance slider. So you can see here, if I make it brighter, it almost makes the color grade in the highlights more subdued. Whereas if I make it darker, you can see more of that color grade appear. It's also kind of a stylistic change. So here you might not want to crush your highlights too much by decreasing luminance. So somewhere right around here actually looks good for me. Now, I'm going to skip midtones. I don't need to apply a color grade to the midtones. Sometimes you can if you want to really refine that, but I'm going to go straight to shadows. And I mentioned how for this purpose, I already added a warm color to the highlights. And so now I'm going to move and I'm going to add kind of a cooler hue to the shadows. Again, nothing happened because saturation was at 0. So I'm going to look at my image and I'm going to stop when I see kind of what I like. So something right around here looks cool, kind of literally and pun intended. Now we have the luminance slider here. Again, if I decrease it, shadows will get kind of punchier, a bit more contrasty, and that color grade effect will be minimized. Whereas if I open it up, you see how you're seeing more of that blue, but you're also kind of decreasing contrast. So I'm actually going to drop it just a little bit here. Then there are two sliders at the bottom here, blending and balance. Blending will control whether you want more separation between the color grade. So if you want more separation between the blue and the orange, you would bring the blending slider to the left. But if you want to blend them more closely together, you would bring it to the right. So you can see here, if I drag it to the right, the colors are blending, whereas if I drag it to the left, they're separating more. So really, this is also, of course, a matter of taste. I prefer a little bit of a natural blend. I don't want it to be too obvious. And I feel like when you increase blending, that makes it a bit more subtle. And then balance controls whether you want to kind of bias the colors more towards the shadows or the highlights. So here, watch, if I bring the balance to the left, see how it's just getting a lot bluer. It's using the color grade from the shadows. If I go to the right, it's using the colors from the highlights. And so I actually do like it balanced more towards the highlights. I don't know, it just looks nice here. And again, if we toggle the eye icon here, I mean, I feel like it does a really nice job. And so those are the 3 underrated color tools and also underrated ways of using them that can really accentuate your landscape photos. Now, we're not done. Like super quickly, I'm just going to walk through here. I'm going to, let's rename this mask. I always like to rename my masks, and I'm going to call this cabins. But I'm going to go ahead and apply an adaptive sky selection. Let's just call this sky mask. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a dehaze to the sky just to pronounce the clouds a bit more. Then let's go ahead and duplicate and invert. So I'm going to call this foreground. And for this, I'm going to apply some texture right around there. tiny bit of clarity, and I'm going to apply a negative dehaze to make it a little bit brighter in the foreground. It was getting a bit too punchy for me. Cool. Last but not least, let's go to our sharpening. Let's kind of zoom in here, press and hold the Option or Alt key, see until we get kind of good detail here. So right around there, press and hold the Option Alt key while dragging on masking to remove sharpening from areas where it really isn't needed. So right there. You could add a vignette here, but yeah, I don't want that. That would probably be the last thing that I would apply. But if we press the backslash key, this is what we started with. This is what we ended with. And I think you'll agree that 3 color tools that we used, which were color calibration, point color as part of a masking selection, and color grading, really adds to the photo. I mean, especially the cabins. Like, I love the way the cabins are popping thanks to using point color with the object selections. All right, so I hope this does kind of inspire you and get you excited about using some of the tools that maybe you normally, scroll by. They're very powerful. They're not hard to use once you get used to kind of what they do for you in your images so that you can use them effectively. Of course, I also have a course called Lightroom Landscapes. It's basically a deep dive into my workflow and how I approach landscape editing so that it can help you create healthy habits in editing your images in the most effective order. So I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Of course, I mentioned I've got 2 videos here, one on color calibration and one on point color. So watch them and really kind of learn why they are so important. Now, if you found this video helpful, the thumbs up button is right over there. Clicking it does really help this channel, as does clicking on subscribe and the bell icon so you'll get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.